Hi, my name is Theresa Wege. I'm a PhD student at the Center for Mathematical Recognition at Loughborough University. And together with Rebecca Merkley, Parina Chang, and Daniel Ansari, I investigated whether highlighting set size when teaching numbers to young children could facilitate their number learning. In the previous presentation and this symposium, we already heard about children's stepwise acquisition of the first few numbers before they understand the cardinal principle of counting. In this study, we focused on children who are subset knowers to look at whether we could facilitate their learning of the next number. Learning the first small numbers is a very slow and effortful process. One reason why it's so difficult for children to learn the next number is that they have to figure out that the number word refers to set size, which is independent of any other properties of the set. For example, here, where the number 3 applies to 3 dogs, a different set of 3 dogs, but also a set of 3 sheep. In order to learn the meaning of the number 3, a child has to understand that the threeness of a set of dogs has nothing to do with the dogs, but only refers to set size, and sets of things other than dogs could also be 3. So once a child has learned that the first card shows 3, do they understand the meaning of the number 3 and that all other cards also show 3? Huang and colleagues showed that subset knowers could learn the next number from a training that showed examples of sets that show 3 dogs and contrasting sets that don't show 3 dogs. However, children who learned the meaning of 3 from this training with 3 dogs seem to only be able to correctly identify sets of 3 dogs, but they seem to be guessing when asked whether a card with sheep showed 3. It seems like subset knowers can learn the meaning of the next number and the set size it refers to from exposure with clearly labeled examples, but they seem to struggle to generalize their knowledge of set size to sets of different objects. This leads to the aim of our study. We wanted to see whether we could facilitate subset knowers' learning of the connection between number word and set size, regardless of the objects in a set. We did this by highlighting in a brief exposure training that sets of different objects can be correctly labeled with the same number word. Here's a short example of how we tried to highlight set size in the sets when training a 2-knower on the number 3. Children in our study would see a training like this on an iPad screen, while the experimenter would describe the display. Look, stars, there are 3. Look, hearts, there are also 3. Look, stars, there are not 3. The idea here is that this brief exposure training could highlight that the number word refers to set size by showing that sets of very different objects, stars and hearts, can both be 3, while sets of the same objects, stars, don't necessarily both have to be 3. To evaluate whether this training actually highlighted set size and facilitate number learning, we compared our new experimental training to a control training. We used an initial given number task to select children who were subset knowers and could be trained on the next number. We then assigned these children randomly to one of the 2 training conditions. The experimental training included trials like the ones that I just showed you. Children who received the control training, on the other hand, only saw sets of the same objects, so only stars, in each trial, lacking the contrast of sets of different objects that we used to highlight set size in our experimental training. All children would see 8 training trials like this before we tested their knowledge of the trained number. We tested knowledge of the trained number with a 2-alternative forced choice task, just like Huang and colleagues did. Children had to pick from 2 sets, the one that showed the number they were trained on. Trials included sets with objects children had seen in the training, as well as novel objects, and also varying ratios between the alternatives. Children completed 8 of these 2-alternative forced choice trials before completing another given number task at the end of the experiment. In our final sample, we included 65 preschoolers in this study, but we tested a total of 149 children with the given number task to find 2 and 3 knowers that could be trained on the next number. We pre-registered the study on the Open Science framework, but given how difficult recruitment for the study had been, we had to make some post-hoc adjustments to our plans for sample size and inclusion criteria. I can say more about that in the Q&A if you're interested. We still conducted our pre-registered comparison of accuracy on the 2 alternative forced choice task between children who received the control training and children who received the experimental training. We used a pre-registered one-tailed t-test to answer our main research question: do contrasting sets highlight set size and facilitate number learning? If so, we should see higher accuracy in the 2 alternative forced choice task for the children who received our experimental training compared to children who received the control training. This is the performance for the children who received the control training. Indeed, we found the children who received the experimental training at highlighted set size through contrasting sets performed significantly better than children who received the control training. You can see their performance here. However, many children in both training conditions did not perform above chance when selecting the trained number. This might have to do with what I told you earlier about our adjustment of inclusion criteria. If we applied our strict inclusion criteria that checked whether children were paying attention during all training trials, children in the experimental condition performed well above chance. But on the other hand, we would only be looking at a third of our sample. It would be great to hear your thoughts on this later in the discussion. We also compared performance on the given number task in lower level classifications from before the training to afterwards. This allowed us to see whether children might have been able to generalize the knowledge of the next number that they acquired from our training and even use it to help them produce sets of that trained number. We found that some children were actually classified in a higher knower level after the training. We heard in Elizabeth's previous talk that the given number task is not 100% accurate. However, children who received the experimental training seem to be more frequently classified as having a higher knower level after the training. So to conclude, we designed a training study for subset knowers and asked whether contrasting sets highlight set size and facilitate number learning. According to our pre-registered and exploratory analyses, my answer to this question is yes, maybe. I think these results are quite promising and very interesting, but the effect is also quite small. We possibly don't see a larger effect on number learning because the training was rather short and passive, and as our attention checks showed, only very few children met our pre-registered criteria for actually successfully completing the training. Next question our findings prompt is why contrasting sets might facilitate number learning. We like to think of this effect in terms of Gantner's structure mapping theory. Learning number words is difficult because children have to map the number word to the abstract category of set size. The sets in our training might support this process by first providing a common relational structure for 3, and second, by providing alignable differences and inviting the detection that not 3, when compared to 3, corresponds to a change in set size, not any other property. Together, highlighting a common relational structure and highlighting alignable differences might help children learn that the number word refers to set size independent of the properties of the objects in the set. We think that this is an interesting parallel between learning number and learning other abstract categories in early childhood. Finally, we think the finding might be interesting for education. For example, when we think about how in counting books, children learn number words alongside different sets, and how we could choose and contrast these sets to best support their learning. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to any questions or comments.